Hey everyone, this is Olga and People of Substance by LemonSkies, and I'm super excited to introduce my guest today, Christy Weir. Her and I work together at Special Olympics, so I welcome as much a chance to just say hi and catch up with her after it's been a few years and see what she's been up to. Please say hello.
Thanks, Olga. It's great to be here. It has been a few years, but I've still kept up to date on everything that's going on. So, really happy to be here to chat today.
So, Christy, I'm going to jump right in. So, you handle brand marketing communications at Special Olympics, and you've been doing that for a few years.
Yes.
How did you end up where you are today?
So, a few years. I've been there just hit 9 years, going on 10. I have been involved in communications and public relations for over 20 years. I started my career, I went to college at George Mason in Northern Virginia. I got my degree in marketing. I thought I wanted to go into advertising when I graduated. I moved to New York right after graduation. I interviewed for jobs in advertising. I got a job, and then they made me an offer that you can't really work and live in New York on that salary, less than $20,000 when you're just graduating at 22. So I decided I was working in retail for a year and was trying to figure out what else can I do with my degree. And I took a personality test on monster.com, and it said you can either be a guidance counselor, a elementary school teacher, or a publicist. And at 22, I was like, I love kids, but I don't want to do anything with kids right now. What is a publicist? Because when I was in school, when I was in college, it wasn't really highlighted as a role. It was journalism, was the public relations and strategic communications backgrounds. So I got a job at a PR firm, one of the big ones, Burson Marsteller. And I was pitching media all the time, and I was sharing stories, and I had lots of different clients. And I love the fast-paced work of that. I loved I had no idea that when you open up a newspaper and you see a story, a lot of times that story is because of your efforts talking to that reporter and building that story. I had no idea that's how that worked. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get such a rush of seeing, that story run and having done all that background work, setting up the interviews, etc. So then I basically worked in New York for about 6 years, applied for a global exchange program to move to London to do the work at the firm that I was working at. And I really just wanted to do something different. I've been doing media pitching for years and was seen as someone that could get great stories, get great coverage, but I really wanted to expand my skill set and do more events side of the house, like running events, doing media training, doing thought leadership opportunities. And so I applied for this role, for this exchange. I got it, and I moved to London, and it was supposed to be a 4 to 5 month assignment. Normally the exchanges were 6 months, but I had just helped win a piece of business that was seasonal on the client side, and they really wanted me to come back to New York to work on that. And then thankfully, the client really liked me. I really liked the client. I was doing great work for them. And I ended up staying 3 years in London. And then I moved back from London to DC area. My family had then moved to that area. And then I started working for another PR firm, a sister agency of the firm that I was working in. I worked at Golan Harris, and I was asked to run the United States Navy account and the CDC tips from former smokers. So that's where I started to get into the public education awareness work. And I absolutely loved working on that campaign, sharing the powerful stories of former smokers, why you need to quit smoking, the education that was involved in that, the data that we were using to inform why folks should stop smoking. I just loved that side of it. And then with the Navy, I was able to train public affairs officers and executive officers in the Navy on what to say in an interview and what not to say. And so then I saw a great role at Special Olympics. It was running global media and PR, and I applied for it and I got it. And it was a big change moving from corporate to a nonprofit environment, but I wanted to work on one thing every single day, all parts of that one thing, at Special Olympics, you work on so many different things in this role, but I just really wanted I love the work that I was doing with the Navy. I love the work that I was doing with the CDC, but that's not always the norm in a corporate environment. You don't always get that kind of mix. And I really wanted to find more of that and work on that all the time. So that's how I ended up at Special Olympics. And I've had a lot of different roles at the organization. Like I mentioned, I started in global media. I managed our media operations for our World Games in LA and our World Games in Austria. And I'm working on our media operations for our World Games in Berlin that are happening next summer, 2023 in Berlin. But also just being so involved in, anytime we have a partnership announcement, being involved in the communications around that, helping elevate our athletes' voices in the media. So helping train up our athletes on how to talk to the media and pitching those stories to media. And now I took on this new role, which is VP of Global Media and PR in April. I had been working for 3 years managing our global health communications work. I had been asked to take on that role in the organization because there was a need. And that was, when I took on that role, that was about 6 months before COVID hit. So no one knew, obviously, that was going to happen. And so I worked with our team in building the COVID policy and the materials and the education that we wanted to share with athletes so that they felt informed and safe during that time. And so now I work on everything, like in terms of anyone in the organization that needs help with media relations and communications, whether that's crisis comms, whether that's event support, whether that is media training, storytelling. I do that. I do all of that. That was a long answer, but
yeah, no, this is great. I actually did not know you lived in London, so I'm madly jealous. So quick follow-up question. Did you bring back any habits that you still have to this day?
Yes, I did. I'd say, one habit, I have both coffee and tea. Before I only drank coffee. And I would also say that, you work hard, but you play hard. I think in England, when I was working there, I remember my first week in the office and I was working on the Siemens mobile account. And this is before smartphones were big. And so we were preparing for an international technology event, CeBIT, in Hanover, Germany. And I was asked to write 22 press releases in a week. And I was like, okay, sure, challenge accepted. Was very shocked that I had to write that many, but you get in a groove. And people were in all open plan. So you shared open plan and you had like 4 people on one table. And a drink cart would come around, and that would come around at like 3:30 in the afternoon. You'd have the tea cart after lunch, like at 2, then you'd have the drink cart at 3:30. And it was the norm to have a glass of wine or a cocktail and also like work on your press releases with each other and build. And it was a very different work environment than I was used to in New York, even though New York is very fast paced, very much team oriented as well. It was different. It was more like you work hard, but you play harder. And that was a great skill to take in terms of building relationships with different, organizations and clients. It was very social. It was a very social part of the work that I've taken back, and I've had that. The friends I made in London, I've gone back to 3 of their weddings, friends of mine. I have hosted Thanksgivings at my house. They've come over and stayed a week and introduced them to the Black Friday shopping experiences. And so we kind of traded experiences like that.
No, that's amazing. And like the tea cart, I mean, that's like the most English thing you can think of, really.
Yeah. And the Sunday roast dinners also. I hate to make it about food and drink, but it was also the Sunday roast dinners that I never knew about until I moved to London. I didn't understand what that was.
Like with mushy peas.
Yes, mushy peas and the roast chicken, or, just roast vegetables and gravy and all that. Like, it's a big thing. Sunday roasts are a big thing, and it's a communal, time for families and friends to come together and just kind of celebrate the week and look forward to the next week. And it's a slower pace in that sense on Sundays, which I think is nice.
I love that. So you mentioned, you kind of alluded to telling the stories of the athletes. So obviously Special Olympics, athletes are at the core of everything organization does. Yes. You mentioned the health piece, which not everyone is always aware that Special Olympics, yes, there's soccer, but there's also there's a huge public health component in helping give athletes access to screenings, and outfitting somebody with a hearing aid can quite literally change somebody's life. So, but you mentioned the piece about spotlighting the stories, and I want to kind of come back to that word inclusion. And you and I have talked about this before. So what does inclusion mean, and why is it important?
Great question. I talk about inclusion all the time, and I think, people don't always hear what inclusion really is. It is, you know, at the bare, the bare minimum, just the bare minimum. Inclusion is when people, and I'm talking about specifically people with intellectual disabilities, because that's, the work that I'm in. But when anyone who is different from you is not included in all walks of life, that could be in decisions, in like being able to chance to vote, that could be in access to healthcare, that could be in access in the schools, that could be, just being invited as a child or as an adult to a social interaction, doesn't have the opportunity to get married, to be in a relationship, to have the opportunity to be gainfully employed, doesn't even have the opportunities to understand technology, to get access to those types of opportunities, to have access to transportation. I mean, so if someone that's different from you does not have the opportunity to do any of that, that's exclusion. So inclusion is when everyone has a seat at the table, everyone, no matter what your difference are. And so, for Special Olympics, yes, we're a sports organization as the priority, but if you don't have healthy and fit athletes, they can't compete at their best, right? And so, what we do is we invest, for over 20 years, we've been doing work in, funded by the Golisano Foundation and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, to fund our health programming globally. So we have a global footprint, and being able to give our athletes access to health screenings that literally can save their lives. You kind of adhere to getting a hearing aid for the first time, hearing your coach or your parent talk to you. We have athletes, the youngest athletes are age 2 to 7 for our young athletes program. And we have athletes that are from 8 to like 98, 99, 100 years old, however old you are, to compete in Special Olympics. And so, when I am focused on telling the stories of our athletes, one of my friends who is a staff member with intellectual disability, I had dinner with her earlier this week, and she mentioned, we shouldn't be celebrating when someone with intellectual disability, does something that everybody else does, and it's taken for granted. Like, that's not necessarily like some people, she's like, some people like me, not everybody feels this way, but some people like me says, why are you celebrating me? Why are you putting me in a separate category just because I was able, like I walked in Fashion Week, for example, or, I had the opportunity to go work. You have the opportunity to work. Do you get a medal for having the opportunity to work? So that really changed my mindset in that moment, because I had never looked at it like that. But that's her telling me that's how she feels excluded, right? So a big part of inclusion is the person that is trying to feel like they're included. If they don't feel included, but you're saying that you're creating these opportunities, you're creating these policies to be more inclusive, but the person, the target audience you're doing that for, doesn't feel that that's happening, then that's not inclusion. You're actually checking a box to say you're more inclusive, but you're not checking the target audience you're doing that for to make sure that they feel included.
Well, and kind of what you said, celebrating for, something that feels very, walking in Fashion Week, obviously that's very normal for both of us.
Obviously, yeah.
But, to your point, I think when something is celebrated that for somebody else would be considered to be sort of very, very normal, it sort of has a little bit of, looking down, like, isn't that nice that he or she or they were able to do that, as opposed to presuming ability to do something.
Right.
So.
Right.
You mentioned, asking the very people you're trying to include what inclusion means. And I love what you said about everyone has a seat at the table. So I guess the question I grapple with, and, I think about this a lot, what is meaningful versus what's performative? And it's not just based on inclusion. It's also, there's this, we kind of have this cult of authenticity and vulnerability, but sometimes it's, true and real, but sometimes it's very much, look at me, I'm being all inclusive and authentic. So how do we delineate something that's genuine and kind of the real versus, just kind of trying to demonstrate to the world and, signaling virtue, I think is the term I've heard.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really good question, because I've also seen a lot of different opinions on this, and a lot of articles on this. I feel that when you look at inclusion, and especially if you're an organization that's trying to be more inclusive, saying that you are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and having all men, for example, on that board, and they meet 3 times a year, and the communication to the organization is, if you want to be involved, let us know. But there's no like communication output saying this is what we're doing. We want to bring you to the table. Again, seat at the table. We want to bring you to the table to have a conversation about what is needed, what we should be doing. Let's do a survey to actually find out what everybody wants to do. I think that is incredibly important, and that's actually showing that you truly are embodying inclusion and it's in your ethos, not that you are saying, okay, we want to be more inclusive and we're going to have a meeting about it and we're going to talk to you about what we want to do, and you're talked at instead of being part of the conversation. And it's, again, going to the seat at the table, but having not just saying then that you have someone at the table that doesn't have a true role, right? So everybody wants to be heard. And this is what I say all the time when I'm doing training as well. Everyone wants to be heard. You can have different opinions of what inclusion should look like, but for the population that you're trying to include or feels excluded in your organization, you need to be talking to them. You need to make sure that they're involved in designing different campaigns and different programs, and that it's not that you're just checking a box. Like, I feel like this is my biggest pet peeve is when companies say, we are committed to volunteering. And we do it. We give you 1 day a year to volunteer. You have 8 hours. And these are the organizations we'd really like you to volunteer with, but you can volunteer with anyone you want. You got 8 hours. The companies that really embrace volunteering inclusion are when they're hiring staff. They're not just hiring staff for what they're doing in that role. They're looking at how they can bring other people into their organization, how they can, are they a good human in addition to doing the technical skills for that job, right? Yeah. And so I think that is a big part of how hiring managers should be looking at hiring, because you are building a culture of inclusion by the people that you're bringing into the environment. And even if you've had a lot of turnover, you can commit to doing that at that stage. But if you're not building the culture of inclusion early on, you're not going to be able to change that, I think, in a very short time frame. I don't think you're going to be able to change it.
Well, and I like where you kind of mentioned this without saying those words, but it's really show me, don't tell me.
Right.
Yeah. That's sort of like, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but actions speak volumes.
Words matter. I mean, and I say this especially with storytelling, right? So you're telling the story, like, I'm pitching the story to a media outlet for them to run the piece. But I have said, since I've been at Special Olympics, I'm not going to have any media outlet interview an approved spokesperson, so a chief of education program, a chief of health, the CEO, the chairman, without an athlete leader right there beside them, because it's the athlete's voice that needs to be coming through the communications. Like, it's their story. It's like, why, if I'm saying Special Olympics is about inclusion, and we're demonstrating X, Y, and Z, and we're changing the minds of folks about how they approach inclusion, and we're changing stereotypes, and we're a convener, and we're activating, but we don't have any of the athletes or the coaches or the volunteers at the table talking about why they do the work they do every day. I mean, I know, I've seen a lot of folks, move from jobs, that they're great at, to move into jobs that they're really great at, but something maybe that makes them feel better about the work that they're doing, right? I remember when I first pitched the Today Show at Special Olympics, and I was like, hi, I'm Christy calling on behalf of Special Olympics. And it's just like, oh, I have 5 minutes for the Special Olympics. Yeah. Now, if I was calling, I'm calling on behalf of like toilet paper, right? I don't have 5 minutes for Special Olympics. It's an amazing organization. We do passionate work. We are changing lives. But I do the work that I do because I feel a small part of what I'm doing every day is changing the face of inclusion for our athletes, because I'm advocating for those that can't necessarily advocate for themselves. Many do, but some still can't or don't have the confidence in doing that. And so I'm helping by doing my part in advocating.
So I think Special Olympics is a little unusual. And for those who don't know, Special Olympics at the headquarters and throughout the offices across the country, athletes are very present within that day-to-day environment. And it is somewhat unusual to have the very people that are the constituent and the population that's being served being very present in the office, because obviously for patient advocacy groups, you're not going to necessarily have, unless it just happens so, you're not kind of specifically bringing in people experiencing the disease to sort of just be at the office and inform communications. So I think it's unusual. But you alluded to the jobs that have a meaning. And that's something I've heard in recent conversations with a number of people, kind of this uptick in people looking for jobs that matter and kind of desire to find something where not only are you applying the skills or your kind of elected occupation, but also doing it in a way that makes a difference. Although toilet paper, I will say in 2020, I think
that's true. In 2020, that was a main job, I think, for some.
Hot item.
I'd say the reason why I left the PR firm that I was working in, I loved what I was doing. I loved managing media teams. I loved training executives. I loved telling stories, but I had a calling, like, to do something that was bigger than myself, that was, committing to something that made me feel good every single day. And even when you have the hard days, it's like you still feel good when you're talking to an athlete and they're telling you, for the very first time I got my eyes checked today, or for the very first time, I didn't really have any friends until I joined Special Olympics. And, I can count on my hand. I have 5 really close friends. I mean, my mom always told me, if you can count on your hand, you have 2 people you can say that are your best friends through thick and thin. That's a plus. Not everybody can have that. That's a true blessing. I think life is short. I mean, none of us know how much time we have. I mean, personally, I've had both my mom and my brother pass away in the last 5 years, both very suddenly and very young. And in my mind, I feel like life is short and no one knows how much time we have, and why not spend it doing something you really enjoy? If you are spending the time and you're doing something you love, first of all, it doesn't feel like work, number one. Secondly, you're limiting your stress because you're enjoying it. I mean, every job is hard, I think, in some parts, but I think when you're doing something that is a calling that you feel good about, I think that's why so many people are moving into those roles. They saw it over COVID. I mean, you were spending, a lot of people had lost during that time. A lot of people love their loved ones, or they just saw, I like staying at home, spending time with my kids or my husband or my friends or my roommates or whatever. And I think that changed the mindset of what they wanted their personal futures to be.
I think it was like a reset for many of us to kind of just slow down. And I think some of this bouncing back for better or worse, but it was definitely like a mental reset on what matters and what maybe matters a little bit less. So, and I love what you said. And just sort of thinking about, I do miss the slower pace a little bit. So not having a whole lot of obligations to run to and from, but yeah, that was a hard.
Well, I think people also thought, they didn't have, there was a lot of, everyone went remote. Mostly everyone went remote at the same time. And I think there was some fear and trepidation in that with a lot of folks, because they were thinking, well, what is this going to look like long term? What is this going to look like for the next 3 months? Like, what does this mean for my childcare? What does this mean for me? I'm going back to school and I'm doing all virtual and I'm not in the, and I just started my master's, for example, or I just started 7th grade. And, what does this mean for me? And I think it made us kind of gain some new skills in understanding a little bit more and being a little more compassionate. And, I think realizing that we're all trying to do the best that we can, and this is a new normal, and it's not going to go back to what it was. When you've been doing something for 2 or 3 years, it's not going to go back to it. And I think in some good ways, personally for me, I would leave my house at 7:30, 7:40 in the morning, drive into work, 40-minute commute, get to work, have to leave, really wanted to leave by 4:30. So I wasn't sitting in traffic for an hour, got home at 5:15, and I'm in communication. So I'm always available and accessible. I always have to check my phone. But, I use that time now where I actually spending a little more time working. I'm not saying to advocate everybody should work more, but I'm spending a little more time, but it's almost like the quality time because I get up, I have a routine in the morning, I go to the gym, I have breakfast with my husband before he leaves for work, then I get online, I'm working, I have breaks, I make my lunch instead of running quickly for a salad for 10 minutes. So I think in some ways it's made me better with my time. And so there's positives and negatives, I think, to all of that. But I think COVID has really taught us to, I think, be more understanding of each other as friends and colleagues, family members, et cetera.
I love that. And I think it just sort of, you're sitting in your house, I'm sitting in my house. It kind of just made things more personal, like professional and personal, kind of blending together. Well, we went kind of deep here. So
we did.
Let's go to more shallow end.
Okay.
For a little bit of fun, I wanted to wrap up our conversation with a little game of two truth and a lie. And I didn't feel like I had to worry about it, but I know like it can end up in the gutter very quickly.
Yeah, it can.
But that's not what we're doing here. So I would love to hear your two truth and a lie. And you can't use the UK thing because I know about
I can't use what?
The UK.
Okay. Yes. Because you know that now. So, okay. Two truths and a lie. Okay. Okay. So I won my spelling bee in middle school at 14 and then got 5th place in the regionals. My sister and I won a trip to see Ellen DeGeneres show like in, I think 2017, 2018, and won an iPad and a trip to Fort Lauderdale as like the 14 days of giving. And then my last one is when I was in high school, I met Rob Lowe at a airport hotel bar, and I tried to buy him a drink, and he politely declined and said that he was sober. And I was also 18. I didn't think I could buy a drink at 18.
That's good ones. So I feel like I can totally see you winning the spelling bee. I think that's the truth. I feel like there's some detail that you mocked up with Ellen. I feel like there was something with Ellen, but I think you probably gave so much detail that that's the one I'm going to call out as a lie. And I'm going to say that Rob Lowe trying to buy him a drink. I'm going to say that's true.
You're right. You're right. Yes. I did not win anything to Ellen. I wanted to be in her show many, many years ago. For years, we were going to go, my sister and my mom, and then it just didn't happen. But yes, that is true. Did meet Rob Lowe. And
how tall is he?
Huh?
How tall is he?
He was sitting down when I met him. I'm not sure, but I listen to his podcasts all the time when I'm out walking or running, literally with Rob Lowe. It's great. Like he interviews celebs or directors, etc. And it's great to hear the other side of things that you don't normally get. So I think that's a fun podcast to listen to. So yeah.
I'm going to add it to my list. Well, Christy, thank you so much for joining me this morning. This was so much fun. Lovely to see you as always. And
yes, thank you, Olga. You're doing great things. So I'm really happy for you and all your success. And thanks for inviting me on and giving a little more love to Special Olympics as always. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.